How brave our patriots were to stand against them. What happened at that battle was the Scots, 8,000 strong, took each division of 10,000 on, one after the other. They took on the 1st Division. They won. They took on the 2nd Division of the English Army and they won. They took on the 3rd Division and they won. What the hell? What's with Scots like that now? Where the hell are they all? Come on! Once like us, damn few, and they're all dead. That's it, absolutely. But the Battle of Roslin was, as I say, very significant. It sent Edward home to think again. I know that song's associated with the Battle of Bannockburn. It could easily be associated with the Battle of Roslin, which took place on the 24th of February, 1303. And you can imagine it would be a cold, bleak day. Us Scots would be used to the weather. These southern English people coming up into this boggy ground, they were taken to the cleaners. We had a great victory that day on 1303, 24th of February. The Red Comyn and of course Simon Fraser, and he had his brother with him, Simon, John Fraser. These guys were prominent in the fight for Scottish independence. Now, I'm going to speak a wee bit about the Comyn. The Red Comyn obviously was a rival of Robert the Bruce. He was the guardian of Scotland, as was Robert the Bruce, and they got into a fight, a wee dispute. They agreed to meet in Greyfriars Church down in Dumfries. They put their swords at the entrance to the church, and then they went inside the church. And what happened in that church is not exactly known. We know that they had a wee dispute. It could have been a fight, or it could have been murder. It all depends on your point of view. I know that every person that's called Cummings that I've ever met said it was murder. Every person that's in the Bruce side says no, it was just a simple case, they got into a fight and the Bruce won. But don't forget, the Red Comyn was a great warrior. He led 8,000 Scots against 30,000 English, and he should not be forgotten. One of the great heroes of Scottish history, the Red Comyn. Now I'm going to ask you to speak now on behalf of the Red Comyn, David Comyn. As we all know, the name Comyn or Cummings is associated with Comyn. So, Dave, do you like to give us a wee speech about the Red Comyn?
Scottish army that faced the English war in a small number, but their numbers will grow. You may ask, what right do I have to come here? What pedigree do I have in Scottish independence? Well, I'll tell you why I'm here to talk about John Comyn, better known as the Red Comyn. I am David John Comyn, that's the father of spelling. I'm a patriot. I have been a patriot since my granny taught me stories of William Wallace in his fight against the tyrannical oppression of Edward, King of England, as a conqueror. I joined the SNP in 1973 as a schoolboy and became a dedicated activist. In late 1974, early 1975, I was one of the founders of the Sons of Scotland in West Renfrewshire, and instrumental in linking up with other young nationalist groups in Ayrshire, in Kilmarnock and Ayr particularly, with my karate sparring partner Tom Moore. That Sons of Scotland eventually went on to become a national organisation. The name was later changed to Siúrn an Gael for political correctness. I was a member of the Art Chorale, the National Executive National Council, from the beginning till I resigned from Siúrn an Gael. I stood in as interim chairman in 1980-81 until I had a successor. I then devoted my time to the Glenetic campaign, stopping nuclear dumping, and after that was elected on the 13th. By virtue of my patriotism and name, I've been invited here today to speak to you about Sir John Comyn, Lord of Badenoch, chief of the Comyn clan, nephew of the rightful King of Scots, John Baliol. It was in the name of King John Baliol that William Wallace fought. The Comyns were one of the most powerful families in Scotland, numbering many belted earls amongst them. They were great castle builders, they had estates throughout Scotland. In fact, Glasgow Cathedral was built for Lord David Comyn of Kirkbride, and the first freestone effigies in Scottish churches are in the crypt of Glasgow Cathedral. Lord David, his wife Lady Isabel, and King Alexander of Scots. The start of the Comyns' involvement in the Wars of Independence was in 1296, when the English had invaded Scotland. As a response, the Black Comyn, father of the Red Comyn, and Sir John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, attacked Carlisle, and Carlisle was held for the English by none other than the Earl of Carrick, the father of Robert Bruce. This was also the start of the feud between the Comyns and the Bruces. In April 1296, the Red Comyn was amongst the men captured after the Battle of Dunbar. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London and later released on the condition that he fight for Edward of England against the French in Flanders. This was a really wise move by Edward, and I don't think. The Comyn family originated from the town of Comines in Flanders. It sits today on the boundary between France and Belgium, half of it in France, half of it in Belgium. They came over to this country with William of Normandy and later moved up to Scotland. The Comyn and his compatriots swiftly escaped, went to their own family lands in France and made their way back to Scotland. Whilst Wallace was defeating the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, Sir John Comyn was in Paris negotiating with Philip IV of France, trying to obtain French assistance in the wars against the English. As usual, this was to little avail, and he returned to Scotland in 1298. It is doubtful that he was amongst the nobles and the cavalry of the Wallace army that deserted Wallace. Some historians allege that he was in a castle near Glasgow. I prefer Nigel Tranter's version in his book The Wallace, where he attributes the role of quartermaster supplier, major supporter of William Wallace to John Comyn. Nigel Tranter alludes that John Comyn was marching down from the north of Scotland to meet up with Wallace at Stirling with 40,000 men. Nigel always liked to embellish his novels up a little bit. However, when I was introduced to Nigel Tranter at the soiree of the White Cockade in Edinburgh by the Grand Prior of the Knights Templar of Scotland, the man was most respectful and deep in his admiration of John Comyn as a Scottish patriot, not a pariah. I like to think that Nigel Tranter's version of the events is true, and that might explain why the English army didn't stay about to carry out their usual rape, murder and pillage, but because of Sir William Wallace's policy of Scots dearth, there was very little to pillage, and they went back home to England hungry. In 1303, we come to what is classed by some as the greatest victory of the Scots over the English, the Battle of Roslin, here today. John Comyn was summoned from Glasgow by the Prior of Abernathy. Some say that William Wallace was also summoned from Elderslie and fought at this battle under the command of John Comyn, Sir Simon Fraser and Sir William Sinclair. They faced overwhelming odds, John Comyn being a wise man and not fighting for ransom and money, gave the order no quarter. That way it would prevent the English from going back and attacking the Scots again. The stage was now set for a great victory. Unfortunately, we hear little of this great victory because history is written by the victors, and the Comyn family were not the victors in the struggles for power in Scotland. around this, shortly after this, Wallace was betrayed. Shortly after that, Comyn was murdered in Greyfriars Church. Then began the attempted genocide of all the rivals of the Bruce. Thankfully, this was unsuccessful. John Comyn has been described by some eminent Scottish academics as leader of the Scottish resistance during his period as Guardian of Scotland. This is a facsimile of the seal of the Guardian of Scotland. John Comyn took over as Guardian of Scotland after William Wallace resigned. I would say that he did a great job defending Scotland and no one else would. I also would like to say that the heroes of Scotland were the men of Scotland at Roslin, later fought on other battles, and many of them at Bannockburn. I would thank you all for coming and listening quietly and attentively to me. I wish you all the best, but more particularly, I wish for freedom for Scotland. It is not for glory that we fight, or for riches, or for honour, but for liberty alone, which no good man loses but with his life. I quote to you from the Declaration of Arbroath, but that quote is also a fitting description of John Comyn, Lord of Edinburgh. Thank you. Alpha Gubra!
Down the hatch.
Well, thank you very much, Dave Cumming, who gave that very nice speech on behalf of the Red Comyn. You know, I'm one of the few people that look to all of our patriots. I don't have any favourites. All these guys took part and fought for freedom. Whatever happened to them in the end, through disputes they've had with one another, it doesn't matter to me. John Comyn was a patriot. Robert the Bruce was a patriot. William Wallace was a patriot. And I'll tell you, these guys had brothers that fought alongside them that were patriots. I'm going to tell you now a wee bit about Simon Fraser. I'm going to cut the speech down because I know it's wild and windy and I'd rather move on quickly so that we don't get into the pump. Right, anyway, let me tell you about Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser is one of these forgotten patriots in Scottish history. We know that he fought in many battles alongside William Wallace and the likes of people like the Black Douglas, James Douglas, the Black Douglas. He also had with him at his side in every battle his brother John Fraser. Now what actually happened with these guys? They were eventually captured and taken to London down to Smithfield. And on the 7th of September in 1306, both Simon Fraser and John Fraser were hung, drawn and quartered at Smithfield in London. And I'll tell you something, there is a list a length of your arm of the amount of Scottish patriots that were hung, drawn and quarters on orders of Edward I. It wasn't just William Wallace, there was lots of them that were hung, drawn and quartered. So remember guys like Simon Fraser and his brother John Fraser. They gave their lives for Scotland. They fought in many battles. I'm now going to talk now about the Sinclairs, and I'm going to ask Gwen Sinclair to come up and give a few words about that. The Sinclair family were very, very prominent in this area in Roslin. Now, they were prominent around the time of the Battle of Roslin. Now what's got to be remembered about the Battle of Roslin, when this battle took place, they still hadn't built Roslin Castle. That wasn't there. That came after the battle. Also, Roslin Chapel wasn't built until the 15th century. So, basically, there was no castle or chapel at that time. This was just old fields, if you like, where this big battle took place, Battle of Roslin. So I'm now going to ask Gwen to say a few words on behalf of the Sinclairs, one of the most proud names in Scottish history. Gwen Sinclair.
Thanks, James. Can everybody hear me okay? Basically, obviously, my name's Gwen Sinclair, and so I was very interested to be asked to come and speak today on behalf of the clan. So I was doing a little bit of research, and I found out that the Sinclairs had come from Scandinavia and had gone down to a place in northwest France, but I think they kind of did some kind of battle, but ended up, there was a guy who was called Harolf, who came along and married one of the princesses and became part of the kind of established nobility in France. They then made their way through England up to Scotland, and when they got to be around here, they were able to help out Malcolm Canmore, and one of them became a cupbearer for him. So basically he was like the hand of the king, and they were also reputed to have brought a piece of the cross, Jesus' cross, with them, which is why we have the place called Holyrood. And believe it or not, it's supposed to be a part of the cross is actually buried there, which is obviously quite important. And the Sinclairs, one of them also became very influential a bit later on, maybe 100 years after that, became the Sheriff of Edinburgh and guardian to the heir of the throne. But here actually at Roslin is the earliest seat of the clan Sinclair. And this land stretches from here to Ravenscraig, Castle May, Balmoral, Dunbeath Castle, Keys Castle and Old Wick Castle. And Thurso Castle, and all the way up to the earldom of Orkney and Shetland. So they obviously had quite a lot of influence throughout Scotland. It was said if you travelled away through the Lothians all the way up to Caithness and on to Shetland and Orkney, you would only be a few miles ever from any Sinclair land. And it's meant to be that there's a grid system that they've created when they built the castles. So if you actually drew a line across the map, I didn't have a chance to check that out, but I'm guessing it's true. Basically, they had very strong belief in symbolism because there's very strong connections with the Knights Templars. So each thing they did was supposedly on ley lines that go up through Scotland, and that's a kind of order of allegiance to the Knights Templars that they had. And inside the chapel at Roslin, each of the Sinclairs that were buried with their leg bones behind their skull. I hate to think how they managed to do that, but they somehow did, and that was also a symbol of the Knights Templars. The clan motto is Revelo Domino Opera Tua, which means commit thy work to God or commit thy work to good. And the emblem of the family is the gorse. Also inside the chapel, John and William Sinclair, there were two brothers who were killed at the Battle of Tiba. They were involved in taking Bruce's heart to the Holy Land in 1330, and they're both buried in the chapel. But for the most part, I was very pleased to discover that Henry Sinclair was part of signing the handwriting of the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, and their untold efforts that lay before us should be given a lot of support. And previous to that, we'd suffered massacre, violence, arson, imprisonment, torture, and starvation in Scotland. And none of us could begin to imagine just how horrible the infliction was upon us when we allowed Edward I to come up to help us sort out our disputed king. And what followed was so cruel and savage on a scale we could probably never imagine unless we were to watch a horror film. Our kingdom was taken from us, and the wars of independence began. And I would like us all to carefully heed our own true history of what actually did happen, what our ancestors did and how much they gave for our nation, appointing St Andrew as our spiritual protector, standing together to sign the Treaty of Arbroath in order to protect Scotland. And from St Kilda in the west to Peterhead in the east, from the tiny island of the very northern territories of Shetland, and right down to the Mullagalla, we must stand together to somehow, some way take up their banner and take them into our hearts and minds. We must muster the spirit of adventure, and one day we can stand beside those who fought here in 1303, who refused to back down: William Sinclair, Simon Fraser, the Red Comyn, We stand here today to say to all of them, we will be a nation again. We will not forget what you tried to achieve. Love, truth and liberty to us all. Sharala Pagubra.
Well, thank you very much, Gwen. That was a very good speech. We were free up to 1707. We were a free nation for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Now, that's something that's not known to most Scots. Some of them think that we've always been under English rule. Not true. We have a line of monarchy going back hundreds and hundreds of years. For over 1,000 years, this country was free. And one day, it will be free again. Believe me. I will die for Scotland.
Yay!
I'm now going to ask up Sean Clerkin to speak. Sean.
Comrades, patriots, the fact is that in 1303 we had William Sinclair, John Comyn and Simon Fraser fighting the fight against oppression. Today in Scotland we have driving 220,000 children into poverty. We've got 5,000 children that have to go to food banks every week. We have got 970,000 people living in poverty. And the only way we're ever going to escape that is by having an independent Scotland. And the only way we're ever going to have that is by having an NDRF 2 on 2017. And that's what we need. We need an independent Scotland of hope so that Scotland can have socialism and independence. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Sean, for that very passionate speech there. Now going to ask Donald Anderson to come up and give us a wee speech. Donald Anderson of the Scottish Republican Socialist Movement. You all right, Donald? It's a cold day, isn't it?
I can't be in hell before I'll vote for the Brits. So no. Well, thanks.